Welcome back to Refit and Sail. My name's George, this is the Solent Boat Butler, and in this episode I am going to be going through a bit more of a deep dive on laminating techniques. So that's laminating with either polyester or epoxy with glass to do structural repairs on a boat. Now, I've shown lots of laminating of the repairs that I've done on the various boats and in the various videos, but I don't think I've ever really gone into the detail of how I go about that. So that is the intention for this video. There's going to be lots of tips, tricks, hints, best practice to employ on the projects that you get involved with. So hopefully you end up with a really good result in whatever works you are doing. Welcome back to a very, very sunny, bright Hamble boatyard. So it's a beautiful sunny day, so I'm squinting and we'll go inside in a minute and show you what I'm up to. But I am on a Contessa 32. It's a fairly familiar sight on this channel. I helped the owner buy this Contessa about 9 months ago. I did a pre-purchase inspection on it and found various things wrong with it that needed to be highlighted, but he went away and purchased it, which is what I advised him to do because it was still a good deal for the money that it was up for. What he's now done is brought it to me, and this is a fairly typical project for me. He's brought a shopping list of things that he wants to get done. Some of those things are the things that I highlighted 9 months ago, and some of those things are wants and needs that he has now developed because he's sailed the boat for 6 to 9 months and has kind of written a mental list of all the things that he'd like to have done on the boat, having used it a little bit. So some of those things are fitting a deck ring, which I've already done, which is the same deck ring that I fitted in an earlier video. I am going to be doing a lithium upgrade on the battery system, and that will be the subject of a video on this channel. I've done a few lithium upgrades. This is going to be the first one I've done on a Contessa though. But the subject of this video is laminating, and so I'm also going to be doing a structural repair on the port side of this boat internally because the secondary bonding is failing there and in other areas in the main saloon, which I'll show you in a minute. But I'm not going to bore you with all the grinding on all the prep work and all that side of things because I covered this exact repair about 2 videos ago, assuming I get these out in chronological order. So I'm going to skip through all the boring, grinding, dirty, horrible jobs and how I do it. If you want to see that, you can see one of my earlier videos, but we're going to go in for a bit of a deep dive on the best practice that I try and put in place when I'm doing laminating to get as good a bond as possible when laminating plywood, bulkheads, stringers, that sort of thing back into a glass fibre boat. Now I'm going to be using polyester resin, a polyester laminating resin for this. A lot of people in DIY land use epoxy or prefer epoxy. I don't really mind which you use, but for a lot of jobs on boats, polyester is a perfectly acceptable, strong material to be using to glass boats back together. But you can make your choice. If you're used to using epoxy, use epoxy, but I'm going to be using polyester for this. And there are some things that you can do to get as good a bond as possible when using that material. When I inspected this boat 9 months ago, maybe getting on for a year ago, I said there was quite a lot of failed secondary bonding, and the secondary bonding is what ties all the furniture and all the structure, because as well as being bunk fronts, this is structurals for the boat, this is effectively a stringer. Quite a lot of that secondary bonding had either failed and been badly repaired, very badly repaired, or had just failed and hadn't been repaired. So if you look on along the front here, someone's put some screws in and stuck some resin of some sort down the back of this glass work here. But if I come in with a screwdriver, it's got a metal end on it, you can hear that's the sound of solid glass, and that's the sound of detached glass. So this will all need grinding back and all glassing back in. So if you look down here, you can see someone has been in here and done a repair of some sort, but there's not a lot of glass there, it has to be said, and the glass work that's been done looks like it is detaching again, because I can see there's a colour change in here. That bit is attached and then that bit is unattached, and I can confirm that with my handy little donking stick. As soon as I go onto the white, it sounds dead. That's unattached. This is attached. Over here on the port side, it's going to be the repair that I basically did 2 videos ago. If I have a look under here, you can see the wood here is broken. The bonding down the back here, if I have a tap around with my handy screwdriver, you can hear this, solid. That's kind of detached. That's all detached. All the way down there's going to be pretty much detached. You can see this has all kind of come loose. What is interesting is on this port side though, this all looks solid here. So I'll just give it the test. And that's how it should sound. That is completely solid. But down in this locker is a bit of a disaster area. Someone has had a go at repairing the failed secondary bonding, and well, they've had a go, that's all I can say, but I think we'll be taking that out and trying again. So if I have a tap down here, that's solid, that's failed, and then we get into the repair, that's not attached. Beautiful. We need to do an initial bond to get this in. I'm going to put a couple of screws in just to hold it in position, and I'm going to loosely glue it to the back of this piece of furniture. That gluing is not that critical, to be honest with you, it's just to hold it in place. But what I will then do is go round and put a fillet of some bonding paste all the way round, and there's a very good reason why I do that. The thing about glass is it doesn't like going around very tight corners. It doesn't want to go around a real sharp bend because the fibres, the glass fibres, will break. And so they like a nice radius. The bonding paste that I use is this stuff. This is called Refit 6470. I only started using it fairly recently as an alternative to what I was using. Apparently it is a higher strength option than some of the other products that are out there, and to be honest with you, so far so good. I've been really pleased with it. I'm going to be using some little blobs of that on the back of this stringer between it and this piece of furniture here, just to kind of have something in there to hold it in place, and then I'll be using it to make all those little fillets around all the edges. Now, there is a school of thought that says that you shouldn't have fillets around bulkheads and things like that, because bulkheads are normally cut slightly short of where they need to go in terms of where they touch the hull, because some would say that it creates a hard point in the hull if you have your bulkhead right up against the hull, and the laminate of the hull could potentially flex around that hard point. The other school of thought is that you do want it fairly well adhered and up to the hull, but you make sure you have enough laminate around the bulkhead so that it doesn't flex on the bulkhead, or if it does, that flexing is softened slightly by the amount of laminate that you have in there. And I could really do with drawing a picture. Let me see if I can find a piece of paper. Right, I have drawn a drawing, which is not very good, but I just want to explain what I'm doing here. If you can imagine, this bit here is the hull and this is the bulkhead. What I want to do is to put a fillet of material in like that, so the glass has something to kind of wrap around, but potentially it could still flex around this as a hard point. So what we do is we lay up our glass in here, and we use different lengths of material, so we end up with a taper like that. Now, I've only put 4 pieces of glass in there just for illustrative purposes, but if you can imagine kind of many more layers of glass in there, you end up with a taper of material, so it softens that hard point. So any flexing is done over a much wider area, and that solves the issue of having kind of a hard point, as it's called, in a hull. And the danger of having a hard point is all the flexing is done in a very small area, and that damages the laminate and eventually leads to the breakup or the loss of structural integrity in the laminate just around where it's flexing. So this softens that and saves the laminate from hinging just in one location, potentially damaging it. I've just pulled my stringer piece of wood out of here and I've done a bit of surface prep. So importantly, everything gets really well wiped down with acetone, sometimes multiple times, because any bonding, any laminating is only as good as that initial bond onto whatever you are bonding to. And I'll come on to that a bit more when we get to the laminating stage, but we're just doing the initial bond at the moment with the free fix. Everything's been wiped down, everything's been given a really, really good vacuum clean, just to get rid of any dust and any remnants left over from cleaning it with some rag and some acetone. So I wanted to make this a real world laminating, bonding, plywood video, because most of these videos, I had a quick look on the YouTube to see what other people had done, and most of them have been done in a workshop with a kind of ideal situation where you can set up cameras and lighting and everything like that, and you've got good access to what it is that you're using as your demonstration piece. Well, that's not the real world, my friends. This is the real world. We're working in a boat, and I'm now learning why people do it in a workshop with a test piece, because it's actually quite difficult to get camera angles so that you can see what I am doing, but I'm doing my best. Bear with me. This is the real world of boat fixing. So here is the free fix. It looks like that. It changes colour as it cures, which is quite nice, so you can visually see when it starts to go off and then completely cure. I'll scoop a bit out with a stick. I don't need much because I'm just going to put a few blobs on here just for this initial bond onto the back of there, and I'll hold it with a couple of screws, and then I will mix up some more afterwards to do all the radiuses. So I'll just put, that's way more than I need, but it doesn't matter because I can start doing some radiuses with it. This is the hardener. I'll put a generous squeeze of this on. Obviously, like all polyester products, or in fact all resins really, they're very temperature dependent. Resins, fillers and everything like that, whether they're pre-mixed fillers or bonding paste like this or just pure resins, are very much like human beings. They like being warm but not too hot, and they don't like being cold. So if you're in a t-shirt or if you're in a light jumper, something like that, and you're comfortable, then chances are your resins are going to be comfortable and perfectly okay. What you can do is obviously raise the temperature of the resins. You can raise the temperature of the environment with a bit of heating. You can also raise the temperature of the materials that you're going to be bonding, and you can do that either with a fan heater or something like that, or put them in a warm environment, or use a heat gun. Actually, what you can do is, if you're worried about the heat of something, if you're worried something is slightly damp, that's also a very important consideration. You can just run your heat gun over your wood. Now I know this is dry because it's been dry in here and I've had the heating on in here, so we're all good today, but I could put my heat gun on there and run the heat gun over this just to flash off any kind of moisture that might be on the surface, and it also warms up the material as well, which will help the bonding paste go off. Right, so let's crack on with mixing this up, because I've put the hardener onto it, and this isn't the best mixing stick, so you want to be mixing it until it's a uniform colour. That's why the hardener and the bonding paste or filler or whatever it is that you might happen to be mixing, that is why, I've just flicked a bit off then, that's why it's two different colours, so you can see when it's mixed. And generally speaking, it's a good rule to keep mixing until you can't see any differences in colour, and then mix it a little bit more, just to be absolutely sure that it is completely, totally, 100% mixed. I'm going to literally just put some blobs like this, because this really isn't a particularly important bit of bonding. It's just I want that attached to that to some extent, just so that the two don't kind of separate and come apart at some point in the future too easily. And all the glass layup is going to be going onto this. It's not going to be going onto that. So effectively, this is now going to be decorative and not any part of the structure of the boat. But this will be. So you can treat that as a decorative veneer now, as we have a better solution. And I have pre-drilled it, so I can chuck a couple of screws in just to squeeze that bonding paste up. Just gotta push it together. Put a clamp on there. Well folks, I have decided that this is going to be the easiest part of the boat, where I can set up a camera and you can see what I'm doing. I've been putting this bonding paste in as a fillet on a lot of this woodwork out of shot and off camera, but I have just mixed up another batch, and what I'm going to do is just get a bit on the end of my stick. This is a mixing stick, also known as a tongue depressor, so it has a radiused end there, and we're just going to squeeze this into the corner piece by piece. Now, in theory, what you can do is the old icing bag trick with this. Basically, you get a plastic bag, fill it full of whatever filler or paste you're trying to get applied, cut the corner off, and then squeeze it like an icing bag to get it in. But that only works if the material you're applying is really quite soft, and I have tried it with this bonding paste and it's okay, but it's not great. The bags tend to split unless you've got a very strong bag, so I'm going in with a stick and just applying it kind of like this, and it looks a bit messy at the moment, but once I've got it into the corners I'll be able to have a bit of a tidy up. But the main thing is to get it on, because once it's mixed up the clock is ticking, and it's reasonably warm today in Celsius. I'm going to say it's probably about 15 degrees. That's outside. In here I've had the heating on, so it's probably closer to 20. I'm in a t-shirt, I'm quite warm. So, you know, if we're treating this stuff like a human, it is reasonably warm. It is reasonably happy to go off. So that is what we want. So just scraping down into these corners. I hope that the camera can see what I'm doing, because that means that you can see what I'm doing. I've mixed up a bit too much, but I need some elsewhere, so it's not the end of the world. I'm just going to get my scraper now, which needs a bit of a clean. I can come in, scrape off the excess. Stick it back on the mixing pad. And we end up with a nice neat radius on which we can lay up the glass in a bit. But there is another step before we actually get to that, which I will come on to. Now, as I said, this is a bonding paste, so it is a structural kind of gluing medium, but it can also be used just for filling the odd hole here and there. So it's quite a good kind of product for using for lots of different situations. And quite versatile actually. I'm quite pleased I found this. I just got chatting with my supplier about different products and he suggested giving it a try. I've been pretty happy with it so far. So I'm putting a radius in this corner and in this corner as well, because I'm going to be glassing the hull into the stringer, obviously, but I also will tie it into the bulkhead because the bulkhead needs tying into the hull, so it might as well all be kind of glassed in all together to make it as strong as possible. If you're really struggling to get into a corner, you can always use your finger, which is also a nice radius as it turns out. While I'm waiting for the fillets of that bonding paste to completely cure, we are in the workshop because I need to prepare the glass. I'm going to start by cutting up some of this stuff, which I introduced you to earlier. This is what Americans call 1708, what I call combi mat, biaxial cloth, and it has CSM sewn to it. You can use it with polyester or epoxy. CSM, which I will also be using, cannot be used with epoxy. To cut this up, I have a roll in front of me, so I'm going to angle the camera down. I would normally use electric scissors, electric shears to cut this, but I couldn't find them in my van. I can't find them on the boat I'm working on, so I assumed they were here, and they're not here, so that's slightly annoying. So I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way with some big scissors. I know that I need about 7 linear meters per layer of glass to go around the bit that I need to all glass in on the port side. I'm going to have different widths of the glass, so I'm going to have 5-inch widths and then 7-inch widths of this stuff, and then I'm going to move on to the CSM and have similar increasing widths. So 10 inches, there's 5, 10, oh I can do 15, 15, 5, 10, 15. I can then get a long ruler, which isn't super necessary, but it allows me just to kind of do that. It doesn't matter, it's not super critical that we get this done kind of super straight. Doesn't really matter too much, but there we go. There's some lines on there which you may or may not be able to see, and then I can simply cut this stuff with my scissors. Now this is where I'm going to get very bored of cutting glass, because I normally have my electric shears, and I will probably find them about 30 seconds after I have finished cutting all this glass. Well, next up we have the CSM. This is chop strand matting. This is specifically designed for use with polyester resin. It has a binder in it which kind of dissolves with the styrene that is in the polyester resin. So you can only use this with polyester resin or vinyl ester. You can't use it with epoxy. There are some CSMs available which have an alternative binder in it which can be used with epoxy, but generally speaking this is a polyester only product. Now you can cut this in much the same way as you can cut the woven material. There we go, it cuts quite easily, but what you can also do, if you can see this, it's kind of got a feathered edge, and that's because I have torn it into strips. And the nice thing about tearing it is you end up with a much more kind of blended finish when you are rolling it out and doing the actual laminating, so you don't get that hard cut edge which you would get with cut material. So if I can be bothered, which I am going to be bothered today, I do tear it. It takes a tiny bit more effort, but I'll show you how you can do it. So if I want a piece that is, let's say, 4 inches wide, I'm just going to mark off, let's go 4 inches is there. No, in fact, let's do 5 inches. So 5 inches, 5 inches, 5 inches. I'm going to put my ruler against those marks and I will tear against the ruler like so. Now it's a bit tricky to start with because the glass is slightly coarser up this end, but if I hold the ruler I can just pull at it and it tears pretty easily. And when we get to the end, we'll have a nice strip of glass like this. I'll put it in front of the camera with that kind of feathered edge, which just makes for a neater job when it comes to finishing off the glassing that you're going to be doing. So again, I need about 7 linear meters of this in various widths, so I'm going to get cracking on ripping all this stuff up. I may be here a while. You might be wondering why I am using a mixture of this biax glass, or this combi mat, or 1708, whatever you want to call it, and CSM at the same time. And the reason is the glass is what gives the laminate its strength, whether it's CSM or the combi mat. But this has an awful lot more glass in it, and when you look at the orientation of the glass, I can put this over the join and the glass is running in that direction and that direction, 45 degrees to the north, I was going to say, up, or the horizontal or the vertical. And so you've got lots of glass crossing the gap that you're glassing together, the two pieces that you're glassing together. Whereas if you're using CSM, the fibres are all kind of higgledy-piggledy all over the place. And so some of these strands of glass will be going along the join that you're trying to attach together, to join together. So they're not really going to be doing anything. You need glass to be going across the join as part of the laminate. Now, the other thing is CSM holds an awful lot more resin than biax or combi mat. So with this stuff, you're looking at a ratio of about 1:1 in terms of weight. So 1 kilo of glass will require about 1 kilo, or maybe slightly more, because this has got CSM built into it, whereas CSM is closer to 1 to 2, so 2 kilos of resin for 1 kilo of glass. So that gives an indication of how much strength you're actually going to have in that laminate for the amount of weight you're putting into the boat. Of course, this stuff is relatively cheap. It's also pretty easy to use, which is why most manufacturers do build their boats largely out of CSM, but reinforced with either woven rovings or biax or whatever to add the strength in. But yeah, my preference for this repair is to use that mixture of both. So initially I'll put in this biax or combi mat, and then over the top of it I'll be using CSM as well to add some additional strength. It gives a much nicer finish, kind of this uniform higgledy-piggledy kind of glass strands, and so you kind of end up using both to get the strength and the product that you want. I could do the whole repair just with CSM. Lots of people would do that. That is acceptable, but you end up having to use a lot more glass to get the strength that you want. You also end up using a lot more resin to get the strength that you want. And I would rather use kind of the best of both worlds in my view. Anyway, I need to get on and get this CSM all ripped up into strips. Back on the boat now with my big pile of glass. So you might be thinking I can just crack on and put some glass laminate into this boat, and you're right, but there are a couple of other steps that are well worth considering doing just to make sure we get as good a bond as possible, because as I mentioned earlier, when you're doing laminating, the bond that you get is only as good as that initial bond onto the plywood and the glass fibre hull. So all the original glass fibre hull, this polyester glass fibre has been well abraded to give it as good a kind of grip or good a tooth as possible for the new resin to attach itself to, because you're not really going to get a chemical bond with 40-year-old glass fibre. So you're only going to get kind of a mechanical bond onto that. So 60 grit sanding belts that we use to prep all this surface so it's nice and coarse and rough, so that should bond well. On the plywood, this is a machined plywood surface, so it is pretty smooth, so it's worth going onto this plywood with some 60 grit. This is a 60 grit sanding disc. 80 would do it, 40 would do it, but 60 is kind of a nice middle ground. And sand across the grain to roughen up this surface as much as possible. You could do it with a sander, but of course I can't really get into the corners, and this is such a small area. Doing it with a sanding disc will be fairly quick and easy. So I'm just going to go in on all the bits that are going to get resin put on them where the laminate is going to be, and give it a good scuff up. And then after that, I'll give everything a really good hoover as well. I'm going to get my sanding disc and give this a really good scuff up across the grain. It doesn't take very long, and I can feel that that is rougher than that now, and I should be wearing a mask because I'm breathing in dust and it's making me cough. So don't do as I do and wear a mask, but I can't talk to the camera where I'm wearing a mask, so I'm being a little bit naughty. But anyway, this can have a good scuff up, and then a good clean. Well, this has now been all wiped down, it has been vacuumed, and it is all as clean as I can get it. I've done everything I possibly can in terms of surface prep, but there is still one more thing that I'm going to do before I start laying up some glass, and that is to give the plywood a priming coat of resin. Now, as I said earlier, I'm using polyester resin. It's in tubs like this. I don't know why, they used to send me big drums of it when I bought kind of 25 kilos at a time, but they've started sending me small drums, which is actually easier when you're lifting them up a ladder and onto a boat. So I'm going to be putting a priming coat on this, but to allow it to soak into the wood a little bit more, I'm going to be thinning it slightly with some more styrene, only about 10% styrene, to thin it up a little bit. I'll paint that on all the surfaces that are going to get laminated too, and then I'll go and leave that for 20 minutes, half an hour, let that start setting up, and I'll come back and I can start laying up the actual glass. So let's pour out some resin and thin it and get it on. Then it's a cup of tea time. Chuck a bit of this into a pot. This is styrene. Some people say you can use acetone, but I don't think it's recommended. This has styrene anyway. Styrene is the preferred and recommended thing to use if you're thinning polyester resin. So 10%, probably about that much. 5 to 10%, you just want enough that it thins it a little bit. Stir that in. It's noticeably thinner than just resin on its own. This is where it starts getting a little bit stinky, so I should be wearing a mask, but I have the main hatch for the boat just there, so there is a bit of wind and a bit of throughput of air in the boat. Next thing is to catalyse it. So how much have I got in here? 300 mils, so 2% would be 6 mils. But I want to make it go a bit faster than that, so I'm going to go 3%, just because I want to get on with this. So that'll be 369, which is a pretty hot mix, if I'm honest, for polyester. If I was laying up glass, I would want it to be closer to kind of 1 to 2% in the temperature it is in today, because otherwise it would just cure on you really, really fast and you won't get a chance to actually get it all on. So but as we're just kind of just painting this on, that is absolutely fine. Happy for it to go a little bit faster. By the time I've come back from a cup of tea, hopefully be pretty close to gelling and curing. Simply paint it on the wood. And funnily enough, now it's been painted, I don't know if the camera will see it, but you can see the scratches that I've put across the grain into the plywood there. Now, I don't really need to prime the hull laminate. There's no great benefit to doing that, but yeah, if it gets the odd drip, it doesn't really matter as well. So I'm now just going to do the bulkhead, which is probably out of view. Right, pretty much done all of this locker, so paint on a second coat. Oh, I missed that bit there. Paint on a second coat so that anything that's absorbed in is replaced. We just want a film of resin on the surface that we can bond to. There we go. Right, that's had 2 coats all the way around, and because I don't want to waste this, I'm going to put some on the back of this plywood as well, so it's all prepped for when I get to it. Well, I have drunk tea, and more importantly, this resin that I've put in here is just starting to gel up and kind of get tacky, which is good. So it's time to lay up some glass. I've just pre-cut the first few pieces to the right length to fit in where I want it to go. But before I crack on, I'll show you what I'm going to be using. So first of all, for applying the resin to the glass, I'm going to be using a roller with a fluffy on like this. This is nylon, I think, so it doesn't dissolve in the styrene. I will be also using a fin roller like this. If I bring it closer, you'll see it has these little lines or fins, I guess, in it. This is good for working out bubbles of air that get trapped under glass, so you can come in and kind of work them out. I've got everything laid out over here. It's always worth having everything laid out. Any extras you might need, like extra gloves, extra mixing sticks, extra pots, everything. Once I have catalysed the resin, I'll be putting it into a small tray like this, because it's just easier obviously to roll it out, but also this has much larger surface area than keeping a bulk amount of resin in a pot, because in a pot there's always a risk that it will start heating up, and the more it heats up, the faster it will cure, which means it will create more heat. It starts exotherming in the pot, and you can have resin boil over and start bubbling and basically cure way too fast is the best case. The worst case is it can start smoking and cause a real problem. So if you can, mix up smaller batches in pots. I'll be using, I haven't broken out the packet, but I'll be using these pots. There's 20 of them. So these are, I think, about 1.5 litres, something like that. So I'll be mixing up batches of 700, 800 mils of resin at a time, because I know I can work that into the glass without it going off. Here's another good tip for you. So I've got a set of gloves on, but you get slightly sweaty under these gloves if it's reasonably warm. And so if you need to take them off and put another set on, it's really difficult to get that second set on. So always double glove. So I have a set of gloves on, and I put another set of gloves over the top, and then I can whip the outer one off and put another one on without having that fight that you have when you have a slightly sweaty hand trying to get it into a nitrile glove. I'm going to put maybe 1.5% in, something like that, certainly no more. It's reasonably warm today, so that is plenty. There we go. And then it needs a really good stir up. And then the timer is running pretty much from now in terms of how long we've got to get this glass laid up with this resin before it starts gelling. As soon as it starts gelling, you really can't use it because it will not absorb into the glass that you're laying up. So if you see it start gelling, basically give up and make a new batch, because you're just wasting your time and wasting materials. It doesn't work. You can kind of push your luck sometimes a little bit if it's just starting to gel, but if it's properly starting to gel, it will not absorb into glass very well at all. Let's roll some of this resin onto the boat. Takes a while to get it into a brand new roller. There we go, it feels nice and heavy now. So I shall probably, because you can only see this back bit here, I shall probably just do the back bit, and then I'll switch the camera off and do the side bits for the first kind of few layers of glass. So you will only see this back bit getting done, but you'll just have to take my word for it. Or you might be able to just about see the sides bits will get done as well. But for expediency and your viewing pleasure, I'm only going to show you the back bit. Right, that is a nice healthy coat on there, and I'm going to get the first layer of glass. This is the Combi Mat CSM side, biax side. I'm going to put the CSM side down because the CSM holds a bit more resin, This isn't particularly coarse glass, but if you're using a woven roving, which is much, much coarser, you don't really want to be putting that directly on the hull or directly on the plywood, because it's so coarse you'll get quite a lot of pockets of resin or potentially pockets of air. So even with this, it's worth putting it CSM side down, because that holds lots of resin. You don't have to worry too much about little hidden pockets of air. So I'm just going to pop that in there and then get it thoroughly wetted out with my roller, and you'll see it become increasingly translucent. Now, if you're doing this with epoxy, it is much more susceptible to becoming thicker when it's not very warm. So you don't have that problem with polyester. It doesn't suffer in quite the same way. Now, to work this in, I'm going to get my fin roller and just gently push against it, and I can also get it kind of down into the corner, and you can see as I push that down, it's becoming increasingly translucent, which is exactly what we want. And I'm just also working out any little pockets of air. Just going to keep moving this around, and as you move the individual glass fibres, kind of them rubbing against each other as you move them around, seems to help the resin soak into the glass thoroughly. You don't want to push too hard, because you can push the resin out of the glass. It needs to be thoroughly wetted out, and there's a bit of an art maybe to knowing exactly how much resin you want, but basically you're trying to fill the weave without the resin kind of running out of the glass. A little piece of glass that's wanting to poke its head up there, and we're virtually there now. Now I know from experience there's the odd little bit there where you can still just about see the glass, but I know that as I put the next layer on and roll that out, that will continue working the resin into this glass. And so I'm going to go and put the next layer on. So that was a 5-inch wide piece of glass, so there's 2.5 inches there and 2.5 inches there against the hull. And now I'm going to put the next bit on, which is this bit here, which is 7 inches wide, so it's slightly wider. And now again I'm going to be putting it CSM face down, so this CSM goes against that biax. But before I do that, I might just roll a little bit more resin on, so I'm pushing the CSM directly into a nice liberal coating of resin. And in it goes. There we go. And I could come in with the fin roller and just push it in place like that. Saves me getting sticky fingers, but I'm actually, now it's kind of located, I'm going to come in with this roller because I need to get it nicely full of resin and fully wetted out. And I already need to top up my tray with resin. That's got plenty of resin on there now. I'm just going to come back now with the fin roller and make sure, starting in the middle, starting in kind of the crease if you like, work my way up. Not putting a huge amount of pressure on, just a little bit. And you can see it's all now going kind of translucent as the resin works its way into the glass. Do the same at the bottom. I'm hoping that in the edit I'll be able to do a little zoom in on some of this and it'll be reasonably clear. And just a reminder, I should be wearing a mask, but I can't talk and mask it. So sorry to all the people that are going to complain about, I should be wearing a mask. Well, if I was wearing a mask, there won't be a video. So, or at least it'll be a very boring video. What to also say at this point is, if you're enjoying this video, please do give that thumbs up button a press, and if you haven't already subscribed, I really do appreciate it when people subscribe to the channel. It costs you nothing, it takes a fraction of a second, but it really does help my channel grow. The last thing you can do is, if you really want to say thank you, is I have a link down in the description. It's a PayPal link where people buy me a beer. And some very nice people buy me multiple beers. Now, I'm not actually a massive beer drinker. I do enjoy beer, as well as some red wine and some other things. But that money goes towards running the show, essentially, and it keeps the lights on. So if you want to be a super awesome viewer, hit the like, hit the subscribe. That PayPal link down in the description. Send me £5, $10, 15 yen, 20 euros, I don't really mind. Anything is very gratefully received. And if you are one of the few people that do support the channel regularly, thank you very much. I really do appreciate you and you and you. Right, that is the first two layers of combi mat laid up. So I'm now going to switch the camera off and lay up the combi mat, which is down here and down here, which is out of shot, because I want to lay up all the combi mat in this locker, and then I'm going to come back and do the CSM. So I'll see you in a minute. Well, you are back in the room. Time to start putting some CSM in. So I'm going to be doing that in increasingly large pieces of CSM as per the diagram a little bit earlier. So I'm going to start with, I think this is about 5 inches wide. So I'm going to pop this in, and what you'll notice is this does require significantly more resin to wet it out. So this resin is still usable, which is good. I haven't had to go onto my second pot, and we just start working that resin in again to get it fully wetted out. And it's amazing how much resin this CSM really does take compared to the woven cloth. Just making sure there's plenty kind of on there. There's no obvious dry patches. Time for a little fin roll. And as the polyester kind of works its way into the glass strands, the binder that holds the glass strands in place slowly breaks down, and it gets to the stage where you can sort of smush the glass strands around a bit to get them exactly where you want them. It just takes kind of a minute or so for the binder to dissolve. And then if you really need to, you can, as I said, push the strands around a bit just to kind of get everything where you want it. But the trick is not to push too hard, because you can squeeze the resin out of the cloth. You're just trying to gently kind of work it
to make sure there's no air bubbles in there and make sure it's fully wetted out. Right, that is now ready, I think, pretty much for the next coat of glass. Because as I move the next coat of glass around to wet that out, it will continue wetting out any very slightly dry patches in here. So that was a 5. Next I'm going to put a 7-inch wide piece in there. Kind of just fold it in half and get the bent corner into place, and then you know you've got an even amount. You don't always need an even amount. Sometimes you might want more glass on the hull. It just depends on the application, depends what exactly you're trying to do. Let's wet the next one out. Generally speaking, it's kind of worth doing the top bit first if you can remember to do that, because any drips will then go onto the mat that is currently dry. As, that way you're not wasting big dribbles of resin. You can start seeing what I mean about having that feathered edge on the CSM now. And it'll become more apparent as I put more layers on, and it gives a nicer kind of finish, or a nicer taper into the original laminate on the hull and the plywood. So there's nothing wrong with having a stepped edge really, as long as it's stepped as in stepped between the layers of glass. But if you can be bothered to rip it, then rather than cutting it, I think it gives a very slightly nicer finish. Structurally it makes no difference whatsoever. I really hope you can see what I'm doing. Yes, I haven't got my head in the way, so that's good. I record all these films, all these videos, on my phone. And my phone is getting very old, so I need to buy a new one soon. And possibly invest. I'm saving up for a proper camera for refit and sale. So all those donations, as well as paying for editing software and other bits and bobs, I'm slowly saving up for a proper camera, so I no longer have to use my iPhone. So that was I've done a 5 and a 7, and then I've got an 8-inch. There we go. Pop that in there. And we're making it thicker and thicker and thicker on that join, which is the critical bit, whilst feathering out the laminate, both on the plywood and on the hull. Now it's more important obviously on the hull than on the plywood, because we're trying to stop that flexing around a hard point. So it softens that hard point by the laminate getting thinner and thinner and thinner away from this piece of plywood. My camera appears to have stopped recording halfway through that, so apologies. That's the last piece of glass that I've put on for this section, but I've just run out of resin, so I'm just going to catalyse the next batch. So I'm going to take that glove off. So I'm getting a bit sticky, which is about 1.5%, give or take. So this is quite tricky to do, but you can see the close-up now, and as I kind of work the glass here, you can see the whole mass of glass is kind of moving around under the roller. I don't know if that's very obvious, but it is to me. But the important thing is that we've got no big air bubbles in there, and we've got this taper that starts here and slowly tapers and tapers and tapers and tapers off into this kind of free area here, which is what we're after to stop that hinging. And that section there is now basically done. So what I'm going to do next off camera is lay up the glass in that corner there, all the way down here. Same deal down here, and just tie it all in. So I'll show you that when it's done. This is now going to get left to cure completely overnight. It's 6:30 and I'm hungry and in need of a shower. So I'm going to come back in tomorrow and I'll show you this again once it's all cured. But because this is polyester laminating resin, I can look at this tomorrow if I wish to. And if I want to lay up some more glass over the top, of course I can. I can just lay it up straight on top of this resin because it won't completely cure on the surface. It will leave a very slightly tacky finish, which is uncured resin, which would then cure if I laid up some more glass over the top. What I am actually going to do is come back in and finish this off with flow coat. And here we go, there's a bit more of a close-up view of the glass that has been laid up in there, and you can see hopefully that it kind of tapers down, and then right in the middle there you can see that is the original hull laminate. Sorry, the light I've got above me, the work light, is reflecting in the new glass, and you can see I've also laid up glass kind of around the front there. Not so much because all I'm doing is tying the locker front into the bit of floor there, so that's kind of non-structural. It's just to tie it all together a little bit. The more important bit is along that stringer there. What I've got to do obviously is lay up the rest of the glass along the back of here all the way along, but I'm going to probably tackle that tomorrow and then do exactly the same in the bottom of that locker there. Well folks, the resin and the glassing that I've done in here has all nicely cured, but it leaves a very, very slightly tacky finish when you're using polyester for your laminating work. But that's a good thing because it means that we can go over this and cover it all in polyester flow coat, and there'll be a chemical bond between the flow coat, which is effectively just gel coat with wax in it, and the underlying laminate that's gone in there. The flow coat will also readily stick to the plywood that is uncoated in here as well. Now, as I said, flow coat is a great product for coating the inside of lockers. It's much, much thicker than paint. You can just apply it over wood. You can even apply it over epoxy. I have done it, but the epoxy needs to be 100% completely, totally 100% cured. Otherwise, you will have major issues with it peeling off. It also needs to be well abraded, but it will stick to epoxy. It'll stick to most things, to be fair. But it's the normal way that you would finish off the interior of a locker or an interior of a molding, where you have this kind of rough GRP finish. So I'm going to mix up some polyester flow coat and you simply brush it on. It's a bit like paint in that you can just brush it on. You can also roll it on. I tend to brush it. The flow coat that I have got has already got some wax added to it. I tend to add just a tiny bit more just to make sure there's enough in there, because I sometimes have issues with this particular flow coat if it isn't well mixed, or sometimes in the manufacturing of it they don't quite add as much wax as I would like. So I just add a tiny bit more and just brush it on. Here's my flow coat, also known as brush gel coat. So I've given it a good stir in the pot, and now I'm going to put maybe 300 mils or so in here, because I'm just going to do this a little bit here as a demonstration. Here is wax in styrene, so I'm going to add another 2% or something like that. It doesn't hurt to go slightly over, better than leaving a sticky finish, which is what we're trying to get rid of. So just lose a bit. There we go. There's 2%. Just squeeze it in there slowly without squirting it everywhere. I always put the wax in styrene in before I put the catalyst in, so you've got plenty of time to mix the wax in styrene in. But you should also try not to stir in too many bubbles. 300 mils, so if I put 6 mils in, that's going to be 2%. It's quite warm in here at the moment. It's probably at least 18, if not 20 degrees C. Sorry, I don't know what that is in old money, but it's kind of t-shirt weather for me. Probably isn't t-shirt weather if you are from a warmer part of the world. It's probably shirt off weather if you live in Scotland, where it's, you know, cold and wet the whole time. Sorry Scotland, but I used to live there. It's cold and wet a lot of the time. Anyway, let's get this well mixed in, and we keep mixing until it's mixed enough, and then we mix some more. I tend to apply gel coat starting at the top of whatever I am coating, because then if it dribbles down onto stuff that you are going to be coating anyway. You can apply it pretty much like paint, to be honest with you. So I'm going to bring it in. It's obviously a lot thicker than paint, if you can think of it in terms of consistency as very, very thick paint. Get it into the corners. And we'll try and get a nice even coating all over. And it does need to be put on reasonably thickly, because there needs to be enough kind of wax in the material that you're, in the gel coat that you're putting on, so that it can rise to the surface. You put it on too thinly, there isn't enough wax in the gel to coat to the surface, so it still goes sticky when it's fully cured. So applying this pretty liberally. I'm hoping that you can see from that camera angle. I'll keep my face out of the way and try and also keep my elbow out of what I'm painting. There we go. That's the back bit done. Might put a little bit more on just in the middle there. And you can finish it off with very gentle brush strokes, a bit like tipping off paint, just to try and get it reasonably smooth. But once it's on there, and it's been on there a while, you need to completely leave it alone, because it's really tempting, maybe after 5 or 10 minutes, to come back and go, oh, I'll just touch up that bit. But actually the styrene has started coming out of the gel, and you'll end up making a bit of a mess. So it's far better to put it on and leave it. And at the end of the day, it's the inside of a locker, so it's not super critical that it's the most beautiful coating in the world. You're just looking for a nice, clean, easy to wipe down coating that looks nice and covers up all the bonding and other work that you've done in whatever locker you're working in. All right, I'm going to continue and I'll show you it when it's finished. Well, that is all the flow coating done in this locker. It's looking particularly smart, and if I've remembered to take a video, you'll be seeing a nice close-up of what that looks like right now. And I've still got quite a lot of work to do on this side of the boat. I've got to build the new bunk tops and the supports for those bunk tops that are going to go in here, but I'm not showing you all of that because I've done that before and I don't want to repeat all my videos. But if you do want to check out some of my other videos, I do all sorts of repairs and upgrades, mostly on Contessa 32s, but not exclusively. There's also some sailing videos in there as well. If you've enjoyed this video, please do remember to give me a thumbs up down the bottom there. It really does help grow the channel. It shows YouTube that you like my videos and it pushes it out to more people, which is all good for my channel. If you haven't subscribed as well, that just takes a second. Hit that subscribe button. Thank you if you have done so already. And also a big thank you to those of you that support the show financially. There's a link down in the description to buy me a beer. Sometimes that does buy beers, but mostly it pays for software and other associated costs with running the channel. If you have supported the channel in that way, thank you very, very much. I really do appreciate it. Anyway, I will see you next time. Bye for now.